Just downloaded last night Rob Bell's book called Love Wins, and finally have read through the book overnight, and want to make some comments about this. This is more than just a book review. I think it's important to note, I don't know that Rob Bell's particular as a person or as a book really stands out in the whole line of people who would question Scripture and question who God is and question whether God has the right to judge and to determine the final fate of every human being that he has created. He's not new in that sense, but it gets a lot of media attention, so it's another opportunity for us to look at these important questions. And I want to start actually at the end and make some comments. I'm going to start at chapter 8, and the last chapter is called The End is Here. And I don't think we have to worry about Rob Bell running around Grand Rapids with a sign saying the world is coming to an end. The only thing that's coming to an end here is his book. But I'd like to start here because I would like to summarize in this first video what Rob Bell really has to say, and then I will go into more detail and more specific illustrations. But I'd like to start out with a part that is very personal, but he puts it in his book. And basically he says, when I was in elementary school one night, I said a prayer beside my bed in my room in a farmhouse in Michigan where I lived. My parents were on either side of me, and I invited Jesus in my heart. I told God that I believed that I was a sinner and that Jesus came to save me, and I wanted to be a Christian. I still remember that prayer. It did something to me. Something in me is what he says. In an innocent grade school kind of way, I believe that God loved me and Jesus came to show me that love, and that I was being invited to accept that love. So let's just take a moment here and notice the switch in terminology. He says, I told God, when he first describes this, kind of describing historically what happened at that moment, he says, I told God that I believed I was a sinner and that Jesus came to save me, and I wanted to be a Christian. But then now, as he re-expresses that, he says, in an innocent grade school kind of way, I believe that God loved me and that Jesus came to show me that love, and that I was being invited to accept that love. We notice here that there no longer needs to mention sin. And not that we're going to be picking just, you have to mention that word every so many phrases, sin, but going on, he says, I'm well aware how shaped I was by my environment, how young and naive I was, and how easy it is to discount emotional religious experience. With very little effort, a person can deconstruct an experience like that by pointing out all the other things going on in that prayer, like the desire to please one's parents, the power of religion to shape a child. But however helpful that may be, it can easily miss one thing that can't be denied. This is what he says then, talking about that. All the things that he could question it for. What happened that night was real. It meant something significant then, and it continues to have profound significance for me. That prayer was a defining moment in my life. So again, with Rob Bell, and unfortunately reading the book, a lot of times he's kind of doing both sides of the fence. But reading the book, it comes through very clearly which side of the fence he's on. So he goes on commenting about the same thing a little more forward in this last chapter of the book. It says, as we experience this love, no more the word, you'll look here please for the word God. As we experience this love, there is a temptation at times to become hostile to our earlier understandings, feeling embarrassed that we were so simple or naive or brainwashed or whatever terms arise when we haven't come to terms with our own story. So Rob Bell is no longer naive. He is no longer simple. He is no longer brainwashed. He no longer would kneel down, this is what I understand, he no longer would kneel down beside of a bed and say, I believe I'm a sinner and that Jesus came to save me and I wanted to be a Christian. No, now as we've experienced this love, there's a temptation. He's had a conversion experience. He now has the idea to become hostile to his earlier understanding. and feel embarrassed that he was so simple or naive or brainwashed. So what I'd like to say, just summary of the book. And when I went through Bob Drell's sermon, Love Wins, which for about 5 years earlier than this, I said, well, it's legitimate to say God is love. That's a legitimate statement. God is love. But basically, as we go through this book, we can understand that Rob Bell says, no, love is God. And we have to understand God the way Rob Bell understands love. We have to understand God the way he wants to define love. That is the big switch that he's made. Love is now God. He talks about now some interesting things and kind of trips over himself, especially, again, we're looking at the last chapter. As we go in the earlier chapters, we'll understand this. But he says, our invitation, the one that is offered us to each and every breath, is to trust that we are loved. And that a new word has been spoken about us. A new story is being told about us. We will see as we go through this book that definitely Rob Bell is a storyteller. And he's a storyteller such that he believes the story is essential. And what do we have to have a good story? If there's something in the Bible that doesn't make a good story, let's leave that aside. Let's no longer put that in as part of the story. So it's interesting as he then at the end of the book, usually a preacher, as he still stands up and acts like every Sunday, I guess. You have to make an invitation at the end, right? So here's his invitation. This invitation to trust asks for nothing more than this moment, and yet it is infinitely urgent. Rob Bell's kind of wiped away all the eternal significance and put everything into our significance, and we'll see into the moment, and we'll see that as we go through the books. But for some reason or other, he says it's infinitely urgent. Jesus told a number of stories. Jesus doesn't teach doctrine. Jesus doesn't proclaim truth. But Jesus tells stories. And we'll see that as we go through the book. Jesus told a number of stories about this urgency, in which things did not turn out well for the people involved. That's a surprise. After explaining away any possible long-term effects, Jesus told a number of stories about this urgency in which things did not turn out well for the people involved. One man buries the treasure he's been entrusted with instead of doing something with it. And as a result, he is, and he puts quote marks here, thrown outside into the darkness. Surprise, surprise, Rob. 5 foolish wedding attendants are unprepared for the late arrival of the groom, and they end up turned away from the wedding with the chilling words, "Truly I tell you, I don't know you." Very interesting words. Goats are sent, and he puts it in quote marks, away to a different place than the sheep. Tenants of a vineyard have it taken from them, and weeds that grow alongside wheat are eventually harvested, and again, quote marks, tied in bundles to be burned. Things to think about towards the end of the book here. These are strong, shocking images of judgment and separation in which people miss out on rewards and celebrations and opportunities. Jesus tells these stories. What Rob Bell does in his book is he takes things that are taught in Scripture, especially in the Word of Jesus, but in the words of other people too. And he says, well, this story, and he says this, now this is just a story. What was his purpose in telling that story? And the details of the story and the words of the story and the specific of the stories, he's willing to trash and just say the purpose of the story was this. So here he goes in a typical fashion. He says, Jesus tells these stories to wake us up to the timeless truth. But then he's arguing in his book that because time has passed, truth has changed. But timeless truth that history moves forward, not backwards or sideways. Time does not repeat itself. Neither does life. While we continually find grace waiting to pick us up off the ground after we have fallen, there are realities to our choices. Now the interesting thing here as we go through the book, we'll see when he says, we continually find grace waiting to pick us up. He said that would go on and on and on without limit until every single person says, okay, I give up, I take God, God's got right and I'm wrong. But what he says, well, we may get other opportunities, we won't get the one right in front of us again. That specific moment will pass and we will not see it again. It comes, it's here, it goes, and then it's gone. Jesus reminds us in a number of ways that it is vitally important that we take our choices here and now as seriously as we possibly can, because they matter more than we can begin to imagine. How does he say this? There's no long-term consequences, but take a moment. We have the opportunity at this moment. We may miss that, but don't worry. There's opportunities down the road, as we'll see, an endless number of opportunities. But he's at the end of the book, kind of his final words is, may you experience this vast, expansive, infinite, indestructible love that has been yours all along. May you discover that this love is as wide as the